Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about reconcile and data mapping. So if you've onboarded a device in NetBox, you probably know that the device itself is the only thing that we can onboard and import into NetBox. So if I go to NetBox, go to onboarded devices, onboarded tab, you see that if we onboard this device, this is onboarded, but this device plus the domain name, platform type, manufacturer, and anything basically that device finder in the Slurpit finds, we can add these into NetBox. But what about other things, other parameters such as IP addresses, such as interfaces or prefixes? Well, by default, NetBox cannot find those, and NetBox is not going to import them into, uh, or rather, Slurpit is not going to send them into NetBox for NetBox to import them. So for that, we have to use this option called Reconcile. With this, we can find the IP addresses, interfaces, and prefixes. And the way it works is that Slurpit every minute is going to send those data into that box. So there is also something else called data mapping, which we talk about in this video. And with data mapping, we can assign custom values to certain columns that we'll see in Reconcile. So it actually makes sense if I demonstrate it for you. But for now, this is enough. I'm going to go to Slurpit and I'll go to settings, the plugin tab. Make sure that you have connectivity. You can just test the API. It returns 200. So the plugin is connected. Also, make sure that the authorization type is NetBox. With token, you see there is no data to sync. Since we are syncing with NetBox, I choose NetBox, status enabled, and make sure that all these options are in sync or whatever option that you want to sync with NetBox. If I don't sync the interfaces, NetBox is not going to find out about my interfaces. So the way this feature works is that Slurpit would put the data that it finds from the devices into a queue, and every minute it would send it over to NetBox. So once we do it, then there is no need to do it manually again. We just have to save this configuration, sync the parameters that we want, and that's it. We have now constant connectivity, constant pushing updates over to NetBox. So I'm going to go to NetBox. So here you can see the device is onboarded, and I'm going to go to Reconcile, and we see the tabs here: IPAM, interfaces, and prefixes. So we have some columns here. We have these IP addresses found, and we have some other columns like status, commit action, and so on. So let me talk about commit action. The commit action is either adding or changing. Basically, if this is the first time you're adding an IP address into NetBox, then the state is adding. If you have an IP address already in the NetBox system, but there is an incoming change, like there is the same IP address being added, but there is something change related to that, then the state would be changing. So here we see adding, and that means this IP address is added for the first time. And as a result, if I click on this, you see that the incoming change is the only data that we see, and there is no difference, there is no current state. And I'm going to talk about this loopback. This is not actually a loopback interface, but uh, I will talk about this when I talk about data mapping. I will also talk about this, the description, when I talk about data mapping. There is the other one which is changing, and this is this IP address. Well, keep in mind that if this is your absolute first time importing these IP addresses, then the commit action should be adding. But since I was playing with this, then this one is saying changing because I imported this IP address once before. So if I click on this, it gives me two sections here. I can now see the diff. This is the original state, and this is the incoming, or basically the new state. So I had this before in my NetBox, but I pulled the IP address one more time, and because there was a change, it showed here in the reconcile, and I can also see what's changed. If it wasn't changed, like if there was nothing about it changed, then I wouldn't even see it in the reconcile tab in the first place. So there is that. I'm going to close this. Now I'm going to add all of these except, let me to make sure, select all except. I'm going to also select the interfaces and add all of them. And I will add the prefixes. Now if I go to IPAM, IP addresses, we now see the IP addresses are added. If I went here before, then there was no IP address showing, because you're going to only see the IP addresses if first you've onboarded the device, second you've accepted the parameters in Reconcile. So I can see it from here. I can also go to interfaces, or I can go to prefixes, and there is something nice about this. If I click on this, or I can see it from here, utilization. So with utilization, you're going to see how many IP addresses are used in your subnet. So if we have a /24 subnet, that means we have 254 available IP addresses. And if 10 of them, 10 of these addresses in this subnet 31.0 are added into NetBox, then this section would tell you n% is utilized regarding this subnet, or regarding this network. But keep in mind that in order for it to be accurate, you have to know that you've imported all the IP addresses in this range into NetBox. There are obviously, in my network at least, some other addresses in this range that are not added into NetBox, and as a result, this utilization percentage is not accurate. I can also go to devices and interfaces, and we can now see that also the interfaces are added. So lastly, I'm going to talk about data mapping, but before that, let's open up Reconcile one more time. And these are actually added, so I cannot see them anymore, but you saw a description saying by Slurped, right? So that was something that I added as well. Also in interfaces, or I believe it was in IPAM, when I click on the adding IP address, then it says role loopback. So again, that was something that I added through data mapping. Sometimes you want to add custom values. So I go to Slurped to NetBox. That's because we are adding data from Slurped over to NetBox. And here we see our tabs, IPAM, interfaces, and prefixes. Basically, these are going to be the custom values that you assign. So every time we pull the information every minute from a Slurped, then it is going to assign these column values by default. So keep in mind that not all columns can be edited. For example, here we can change the status, role, VRF, tenant group, tenant, and description. And if I go to interfaces, this one has different columns, and we have to assign different values to it. This one has speed in kilobits per second. It has duplex information. And the reason that you don't sometimes see anything here, so we see something here, but if I go back to IPAM, VRF is not showing. That's because this is something that you have to configure from your NetBox. Also, prefixes has its own columns, VLAN, etc., etc. So that was it for this video. I will see you in the next one.